Hi. Can you, for once, just pretend you like me? Honestly. Hi and welcome to the Snow White Chronicles. In this video, I will show you how I researched and recreated an outfit that maybe, perhaps, could have been worn by an actual Snow White. I don't know. So just a disclaimer that recreating iconic Disney gowns in a historical style is absolutely nothing new. It has been done by the cosplay and costuming community for like ages, and I'm definitely not the one that came up with that. Snow White has been done 1,000 times as well. A lot of these times were absolute chef's kiss, but hopefully the whole process will still be mildly interesting. I don't know. Why did you click if you're not interested? I just realized my brooch was like off the whole time. So Snow White may not be my favorite Disney princess, but it is the OG Disney princess. It was literally the first Disney princess, and because of that, her outfit is pretty iconic and very recognizable. So let's start off by figuring out, or like trying to figure out, when the movie is set. So Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was released in 1937. It was Disney's first animated feature film and people were crazy about it. They loved it. So obviously a lot of the elements of Snow White's whole visual appearance can be traced to 1930s fashion because that's when the movie came out, and back in that time a lot of historical outfits were basically 1930s styles historicized a bit. So the hair and the puffy sleeves and even the shoes they do resemble 1930s fashion more than anything else. But the whole thing is obviously not set in 1930s. And the movie is based on the Grimm brothers story that was first published in 1812 apparently, but you know, the movie is obviously not set in 1812 either. Like, there is no Regency fashion, no raised waistlines, the prince doesn't look very Regency era either, and even the architecture and the detail in the interiors and exteriors suggests some earlier time, but how much earlier? When exactly? So German historian Eckhard Zander came up with a theory that the Grimm's brother fairy tale was based on an actual story of Margareta von Waldeck, who was a German countess. And there is indeed several elements of her biography that do sound familiar. A despotic stepmother, a handsome prince that she's fallen in love with, and dying young, possibly to poison. So it is not certain whether the Grimm brothers were actually influenced by this story or whether the original story was influenced by Margareta von Waldeck's story, but it does seem like the movie has taken visual hints from that time period, which was 16th century. I didn't mention that. So I'm sticking to this one because it seems like the visuals and aesthetics of the movie are heavily influenced by 16th century Germany. So assuming that, and assuming we're stuck with 16th century German fashion, I was trying to find a particular style that would fit the aesthetics of the movie outfit and the time period, because as you know, 16th century was a long time, 100 years to be precise, for those of you who did not learn that in school. Why am I telling people useless information? So was it early 16th century? Was it late 16th century? I knew sort of when Margareta von Waldeck was born and when she died, but I didn't know if Disney knew, if that makes sense. So my brain immediately went Lucas Cranach portraits. So Lucas Cranach the Elder was a German painter that often focused on wealthy German women and just portraits of them, and biblical characters but portrayed in 16th century Germany, so there was a lot to work with. And also one of the most iconic elements of Cranach's style when it comes to like what he portrayed was sleeve rolls, and sleeve rolls with colored slits showing a different type of fabric was sort of the most iconic part of Snow White's outfit for me. So I was like, sleeve rolls are an item or element of clothing that appears on pretty much most of Cranach portraits. And the other element of Snow White's outfit, which I think is pretty iconic, is the high standing collar. And I think it's that element that turns it from a typically 1930s dress to something much more historically inspired. So I was looking for a portrait that featured both the sleeve rolls and the tall standing collar, and it wasn't easy, but lo and behold, there she is, a perfect Snow White material. So the only problem was that this portrait was painted in 1534, which is when Margaretha von Waldeck was 1-year-old. But while the higher collars were still a thing in 1550s when she sort of lived and died, by that time the puffy sleeves were almost completely gone. So I had to compromise and pick a style that I think works better with the movie outfit, even if historically it doesn't make a lot of sense. But considering the whole project is evolving around the story of a girl named Snow White, I think I should be fine. So once I had a clear inspiration in the means of this particular portrait, I had to redesign the dress because obviously the color palette is completely not Snow White. So I tried changing the color palette to make it resemble the movie outfit the most. Like, I wanted to stay with the silhouette, all of the elements I wanted to stay the same, but make it a 1937 Snow White color palette, if that makes sense. And I also wanted to stick to not only the colors but also the placement of them. For example, the sleeves being lighter than the bodice, the skirt being yellow, etc. I didn't want to mix it too much. So I turned the bodice dark blue, and I turned the inside of the collar white, and then I turned the sleeves light blue with red fabric peeking through. I originally actually made it white because most of the fabric peeking through the slits and sleeves in the Cranach portraits, I noticed that they're usually white, but for this project I thought, you know what, let's just stick to the original inspiration, which is of course the beautiful 1937 design. And then I decided to make the decorated cap that she's wearing on her head, which is sort of, if you look at it closely, it sort of resembles Snow White's hairstyle shape a little bit, so I wanted to make it red because she is wearing a red bow on her head in the movie. And then I made the skirt sort of banana yellow, and the rest remained unchanged because those elements I thought were typical for the era. And what exactly was typical for the era? Most of the dresses portrayed by Cranach the Elder are early 16th century German Saxon dresses. Gowns? Anyway, the research started, and not only was I not familiar with fashions in that particular time period, but I was also not familiar with that particular style of dresses, so it was a lot of fun for a noob like me. I needed to figure out not only what those dresses consisted of, but also how they were constructed. First of all, a huge shout out to my 16th century reenacting friend who helped me out and explained several elements of the outfit for me, even though that's not the style that she is specializing in, but you know, a lot of 16th century Germany stuff is made in a similar way, so shout out to you, my friend, thank you. I also used information found on several Facebook reenacting groups and 16th century costuming groups, chef's kiss. I also used the GermanRenaissance.net blog a lot, because that lady is an angel and she posted a lot of patterns and specific information and links to research and analyses of particular garments, so God bless her. There was also like several blogs documenting a making of a Saxon gown. One specific one that featured a lot of useful research for me was SaryDuenCreations.weebly.com, and here's what I found out. There isn't much information available. Like, pretty much all of the sources that I've read are different. Like, a lot of people are speculating about what the dresses looked like. So there's several information that people sort of agreed upon, but also there is a lot of stuff that is like, we don't really know how that was made, but it makes sense that it would probably be made like this. So as far as we know, there isn't an extant garment of this type. The closest we get is Mary of Habsburg gown that was made in 1520s, which is a completely different style. It doesn't look like that at all. So it's also kind of useless. Like, it doesn't have the pleating of the skirt, the sleeves are completely different, the bodice is all completely... It's just, it wasn't useful to me at all. Let's just say that. And most of the construction knowledge that we have is from the visual cues that we get from the portraiture, caricatures, all sorts of that information is... Because that's seems to have been quite a niche style. Like, that wasn't what half of Europe wore, unlike, let's say, Tudor gowns or Spanish Renaissance outfits. And what makes things even more complicated is that a lot of these dresses and these garments varied from portrait to portrait, and it is also very likely that Cranach invented half of these styles himself, or at least used some sort of artistic license to spice things up a bit. So, you know, you never know. Maybe I just made something that didn't even exist. I don't care. It's nice. Anyway, here's what I did find out. So the cap is a Haube, which I'm assuming is pronounced Häube in German, which is called Goldhäube in numerous sources, but I think it's a modern name for it. I don't think they use that name. And a plain, okay, I'm just gonna say Haube because I have no idea how to pronounce it. A plain Haube consists of 2 or more elements. Like, you have an undercap, you have something to fill the shape, and then you have an over layer, but it seems like the Goldhaube was actually just one single cap, heavily decorated. That's what I found out about the Haube. I'll tell you about the construction later. The fabric peeking through at the neckline is hemmed, which is an undershirt with a decorated collar in this case. So the collar was either pinned or sewed on. The basic hemmed often featured some sort of smocking in the neck area. So, okay, the bodice is where it gets a little messy construction-wise. So my first instinct was, okay, so it's the shirt peeking through at the stomach, right? But then where did the gathers go? Where did all the little pleats go? Why is the shirt not bulking under the black cord? It's like completely flat out there. And it's not just this painting, it's every single painting of this type I've seen. There is usually some sort of like white panel there that is completely smooth. So Cranach may have decided not to paint the bulks and gathers for aesthetic reasons, but then why would he be so precise at depicting gathers just above this area but not at like the stomach area? It doesn't really make sense to me. Like him just going like, oh yeah, this is gonna be so realistic, and then getting to the stomach and going like, let's just smooth it out here because I'm bored. And also you can tell that the cord lays super flatly on this particular spot. It's not pushing onto the fabric, so it must be something that's moderately stiff. And I've seen people go around it several ways, and I have no idea which is the right one, but it's just some logical thinking here. So I've seen someone made a white kirtle to go underneath the gown, and true, a supportive undergarment makes total sense in that era because that is something that was probably used, but it doesn't make sense for several reasons to me. Firstly, there are lots of depictions of women with their bodices undone and there is no kirtle there, it's just the undershirt. Secondly, Cranach models always had pretty round breasts. It was a very different look from what you're used to when we're talking about Tudor fashion, for example. Like the bodice is always very flat and the boobs are either like flattened or pushed upwards, whereas Cranach gowns, if you look at the depictions of them sideways, the boob area is always pretty prominent. Like it's just round, you can see the boob is there. It's not like completely stiff and stiff. So it looks to me like they're not flattened by any sort of structured underbodice. Some people have made kirtles with boning or stiffening just below the bust, just so the bust stays sort of composed. And then I've seen some people that made a square piece resembling an 18th century stomacher that was just sort of slid into the dress, which also I think it works, except the skirt is really heavy and the pleats in front would probably just go like that. So I thought it would probably have to be attached to the skirt at some point. So analyzing the paintings, it looks like the white stomach piece was something that was attached to the skirt in front and then laced under the bodice, and this is the version I decided to do. And then lastly, the sleeves. I was pretty sure the fabric that peeks through the sleeves in the original portrait is not in fact the undershirt, because there is no way it would look this puffy and perfect, even on the portrait. And also, like, you know, every movement the undershirt would just slit from the puff and just like go. It's just too messy. I don't think that's what they did. So I decided to make the sleeve roll filling, if that makes sense. So once I more or less had an idea of what I wanted to do, it came to choosing the fabric. And I must admit I messed up because that was very early stage of research and I had to order it as fast as possible for fear of it not coming to me fast enough. So I focused too much on the painting itself and just assumed that something that rich and patterned must have been brocade, when it was actually most likely damask, which would probably be a lot thicker and heavier. So I ordered a pile of brocade, only to find out that it's a lot lighter, like as in thinner than I thought. But at the same time, finding that many different shades of affordable damask, which is a lot more rare than like just random brocade, would probably be impossible. So I think I'm still happy with my brocade choice, even though it was not super fun to work with. I also low-key thought that buying brocade in a shop that has, you know, silk in their name would mean that the brocade is silk, but it's actually not. So that kind of hijacked my efforts to make this outfit as historically accurate as possible. But so I figured out that the best way to start it is to focus on the most time-consuming elements, because I just cannot make these last minute. And I did have a specific deadline for this originally because I thought I will be allowed to film at a castle. Didn't happen, never mind. It did affect a lot of my decisions when it came to making of this dress. So one of those decisions was starting off by focusing on all the things that require me to sew pearls on. And the very first thing was the color. So the fabric I intended for the color turned out to be like bright orange, which was not what I had in mind. So I embroidered it on the wrong side and it actually worked. I used real pearls, which were a pain to work with because I literally have not managed to find a needle that will go through them. I bought the thinnest needle in the city and it was still too thick. So I had to use a wire to put them on a string and then sew that particular string onto the collar. It was a mess. And they are also expensive as hell, obviously, and super heavy. So for the rest of the outfit, I decided to use fake pearls because the fabric was plastic anyway. So it kind of felt like a waste to embroider polyester brocade with real pearls, if you know what I mean. Another thing I attempted was making a cord using a lucette. And here I'm showing you how it works, and I don't know what happened because I have done it before, and I made a pair of shoelaces and it was all okay and it's legit not complicated. But yet this time, every time I took a break and then picked it up like a day later, I messed it up. I didn't know which way to go. So the first time I messed it up was during a live stream, I think. I messed it up again. I don't know what I'm doing. And then basically every time I stopped, and I had to stop, like obviously I'm not gonna make the whole cord, I'm not gonna just sit the whole day and make it. I wanted to do like half an hour daily, but every time I stopped I just couldn't figure it out afterwards. So this was going on for weeks before I finally gave up and I just braided the cord. So next up was the Haube, whatever, and this damn thing literally took me months. I first used a disappearing pen to sort of mark all the lines, and then I started working on it. But I obviously didn't manage to do it during the day, right? Because it's a lot of work. So then the next day I look at it and all the marking lines are gone. And I'm like, oh, it must have been the water from when I was setting my hair. So I do it again with the same disappearing pen. And then the next day, guess what? It's gone again. So eventually I marked it for the third time, and this time using chalk, and that's when I really started working on it. But that process alone was like 2 weeks. And I noticed it's a nice side job for when I'm watching something. So I watched BBC's Pride and Prejudice, and then I watched North and South, and then Sense and Sensibility, and then I watched My Best Friend's Wedding, and Dark Victory, and Trouble in Paradise, and The Awful Truth, and Set It Up, and Return of the Hero, and Inglourious Basterds, and Jackie Brown. And when all this was done, I finished one part of the Haube. But that was the most time-consuming part. It was a continuous process that took months. So let me just show you what I did in the meantime. As always, I wanted to start with the foundations first. So I researched the hem or the undershirt, and it seems like it didn't change much from early 16th century to late 16th century. And I've already done late 16th century, so it wasn't too bad. Most of the shirts opened in front though, and I thought if the collar has no front opening, I would have to either stitch it on every single time when I wear it, and like it's not easy to stitch something on when you're wearing it, or I would have to pin this on. But judging by how heavy the collar was, it made no sense for it to be pinned because it would just drag the whole thing down. So I decided to close my shirt in the back. I'm not sure how historically accurate that is, to be honest, but it makes sense. And also there is no slit seen in the painting, so it was either not there or it was just hidden well enough. So I used a smock pattern from German Renaissance.net. and it was pretty straightforward, and as I said, I've made an early 17th century smock before, so it was pretty similar, and those types of garments would usually be linen, but in the portrait it appears to be something much thinner. It would be pretty much impossible to achieve such thin gathers using any type of linen, even the thinnest linen possible, so I decided to use silk chiffon. And at first I contemplated whether the whole thing is like a separate decorative piece, but I just made it a hemmed anyway. Like, if that was a rich lady, and judging by the amount of gold that she has, she probably was, she could afford a silk hemmed, even if it was impractical and see-through. And a lot of Renaissance shirts feature decorative smocking at a collar, but I thought it would be kind of a waste to spend hours making it and then cover it all with the pearly color, so the kitty was a bit distracting in my research, not gonna lie. So the way I made this smock was just I cut 2 pieces of fabric, which were mostly rectangles, except for some adjustments in the neck area, and then I sewed the shoulder seams together and marked several rows of dots on the collar. The dots served as guidelines for me for my needle, so I did 7 lines of very wobbly stitches, and here I demonstrate how the whole thing is gathered, but I actually had to do all 7 rows first and then gather the whole thing. And the candlelight, by the way, is not a cinematic touch, but my room is so damn dark that it actually helped when I had a candle on my working space, let's say, which was obviously my carpet. So I also realized that I can't fully gather a collar before finishing the embroidered piece, so I decided to go back to the pearl disaster and finish it up first, and shout out to my sister for coming in for a rant and then realizing she's on camera. What up, update time? So it's going super slow. It's taken me a week to embroider like 2 pieces, and it's not even embroidery, I'm just like sewing pearls on. So here is the collar of the hemd, apparently, if that's what you say in German, and then here is the Haube, which is like halfway, less than halfway done, because I also need to like put some details inside those. It's super wobbly and uneven, but I'll be happy to be done with it. And then apart from this piece, which is like the main part of the Haube, you also have like strips of fabric that will also need to look somewhat like this, so there's still a long way. And this is what a semi-finished hemd looked like. Like, this was before pressing the seams and stitching on the collar. And as you can see, the way underarms are constructed is using gussets, which in my case were just like squares of fabric folded in half. And I stitched the decorative collar on, and I adjusted the gathers, and then added some pearls and loops in the back of the collar to close it. And thus the first garment was mostly finished, though there was some decoration left, which I'll talk about later. Now, when ordering the fabric, I was sort of expecting it, like, not all of the colors to be what I imagined and to not match my project slightly. And to be fair, most of it was identical to what I had in mind, except the orange fabric of the collar and the blue fabric for the sleeve. And at first I thought, you know what, people will get the idea, it's still blue, right? But then that, combined with the questionable red decorative spots that look like period blood, made me go like, it just started bothering me. So I wanted to buy blue fabric dye and just dye it, but for some unknown reason, the whole supply of blue fabric dye in my city was sold out. And I literally checked like several shops, and they all said, even though those were like different brands, they were like, oh, we're out of blue though. I don't know what happened. One lady told me it's like a manufacturing issue, but it was basically gone, and I was running out of time, as I said. So my backup plan was just fabric paint, and that's what I did. I bought a lot of fabric paint, and I just painted it. And it did make fabric much stiffer, but because it was all going to be used on the structured sleeves anyway, it actually worked quite well when it was stiff. So painting was a bit annoying, not gonna lie, but it did turn out almost the exact color that I had in mind. And also my dumb self realized at some point that I can actually just pull out the red threads that were responsible for the period stain look. So here is a brief footage of me working on a curl bodice until I realized it would be too stiff to give me the round bust silhouette of the era, but I did spend some time on that before I resigned, and I believe the dress was structured enough not to have any sort of garment, especially if your bust wasn't too big. And that is sort of supported by the portraits, like there is just the undershirt underneath, but you know. So after painting the sleeves, by the way, it looks like I've been wearing the same outfit for months at this point. So after painting the sleeve fabric, I cut out the sleeves, sort of like the base of the sleeve, using German Renaissance .net pattern, and then I divided the sleeves into 7 sections, and the original sleeve actually has 8 rolls, but you know, sue me. And those sections were then cut into strips of equal width. It sounds really complicated, but basically I just wanted to make sure that sleeve rolls follow the shape of the sleeves rather than just being random strips of fabric sewn onto the sleeve. So originally I thought I would just band the edges with black tape and just call it a day, you know? But I ended up cutting strips of wool a little wider than the strips of brocade, and then I sewed them together, which stiffened the whole thing at the same time, and then I flipped it on the right side and repeated this process 116 times. The sleeves were definitely the most complex and mentally draining part of this whole process. Let's just say it took me 2 weeks to complete a single sleeve, and I'm not even joking. Anyway, I then sewed the top of the wool-lined strips to the sleeve lining, and then I put some red fabric underneath. And then I pushed the straps a little bit and sewed the bottom, and it was hell. By the way, I didn't sew for like 3 days because my cat was sitting on my chair, and that happens so rarely. I didn't feel like making him leave, so I just accepted my fate. So when rolls were sort of done, all that was left was to cover the raw edges of the strips and the brown lining, picking through the rolls with some fabric, and that's super counterproductive and 0 out of 10 would not recommend. And my dad saw me do that and he was like, why didn't you just make a sleeve a bit longer and then make the slits and then just pushed it upwards? But I was like, no, my dude. First of all, I'm not that kind of a math magician. And second of all, even though the painting makes it look like there's no seam between the roll and the flat piece, I'm pretty sure the strips would not be that puffy naturally. And third of all, I would still have to attach the top fabric to the lining to avoid the rolls just going flat like that. And finally, I would have to bound each slit by hand with some sort of like black tape. So that sounds like even a bigger nightmare than the one I was already living with those sleeves. So there is no easy way to do it. So long story short, my solution is definitely debatable and counterproductive in many ways, but it gave me a lot of control over the shape of the rolls, how puffy the rolls are, how much of the red fabric is peeking through, and overall I felt much more of a sleeve magician than I would otherwise, I think. Then I made a mock-up of the bodice, even though I should have actually done that before I started the sleeves, but I thought the sleeves are a superior part of this outfit. So worst case scenario would be that I had to modify the bodice to fit the sleeves. Who decides which part of the outfit is more important anyway? Like, it is time to ditch societal norms and go, sleeves are dictating the rules here and that's okay. So first of all, I grossly overestimated the size and height of the collar. Okay, I look like 85 right now, but just to show you that, like, I think I went a little overboard with the collar perhaps? I don't know. Did I? Maybe it should just be like that. This side is just not working. Actually, I will try and do this though. Like, instead of just having this wide piece that I thought would just stay like that, I'll just do this, like fold it. And see if that works. The rest though, like, it ain't too bad. It was a little bit difficult trying to make a mock-up of something that is basically an open bodice, and I made a bust panel that was supposed to imitate the decorative breast piece, and that helped a little bit. But the most tricky part was definitely the collar. I wanted it to be as close to the one in portrait as possible, but it was too tall, and then it was too wide, and then too widely set. And overall it was just messing my otherwise perfectly good mock-ups a lot. So eventually, after a gazillion adjustments, I decided that I'm sticking to this mock-up and let's just move on. So of all the brocades I ordered, the dark blue one is definitely the most vibrant and the prettiest, so here is some sexy brocade montage for you. after I cut out the blue pieces, I sewed them together, and then I used my last linen mock-up as the lining, and that was of course an environmental decision. It had nothing to do with me just being lazy. Anyway, I joined the fabric and the lining together, and like all the edges except the sleeves and the bottom, just so I could flip it inside out. I pressed it so it laid nicely. So, oh, you can see my bra. So I'm trying this on, right? And I mean, it's not like super impressive. But wait. Bitch. Excuse me? And then it was time for the Brustfleck. So this lovely piece, this lovely sounding piece is just a decorative... Oh my god, I just farted with my hands. That's so strange. Anyway, this lovely piece is basically the decorative element across the bust, and it features some heavy decoration. It's one of the like statements of this style. So I cut a piece of fabric and I cut a piece of linen and I joined those two together and I flipped it inside out, and then I realized that it's actually too narrow, so I had to do the whole thing again. Then I left it for when I feel like adorning it with pearls, which was not anytime soon at that point. So I moved on to the skirt, and there isn't much of the skirt that we see in the painting, but most Kranach skirts were heavily pleated and quite long, and also featured a decorative strip of fabric at the bottom, which I think is called a guard. And the movie Snow White skirts is actually really plain, but I wanted to add that decorative strip just to sort of spice things up a bit, because the skirt, just compared to how heavy the top of the outfit was, that would be just one plain skirt. So I cut long strips of leftover fabric from the haube, and then cut the hem of the skirt off and sewed the red fabric in, and you know, this is before pressing the seams, so it looks super wobbly, but you get the idea. So when it comes to the pleating, there are several pleating techniques, and the one that gave the closest results to what I was looking for was rolled pleats, and it seemed complicated at first, but once I figured out the math, it went quite fast. Now, taking a break from the skirt, we're back to the Brustfleck, and from what I understand, the Brustfleck is just the decorative piece and not the white stomach piece. So for the white piece, I needed something stiff enough not to bulk under the cord, but at the same time something soft enough not to flatten my chest in any way. So I cut one layer of white silk taffeta, 2 layers of thick linen, and 1 layer of thinner linen as the lining, and then I joined all those layers together and I flipped it inside out, and it worked. I sewed the bodice to the skirt, and then I sewed the white piece to the front of the skirt, and I tried the whole thing on. It was okay. It was fine. That was also more or less the time that I watched the last movie and finished the big haube piece, and I made other elements too, and I cut out the lining for each piece with 2 pieces of linen lining for the main piece, as it turned out a little too heavy. I didn't want the pearls to drag the whole thing down. And not gonna lie, the whole construction of a gold haube left me hella confused. Like, I had no idea how to do it, so I kind of winged it. So I realized that if I'm not making a kirtle, there is no way the skirt will look right. It's just really floppy. And I first tried making a wool petticoat and just put it underneath the skirt, but I slowly came to the conclusion that yes, I will in fact have to pick the whole thing apart and undo both the petticoat and the skirt and just treat them like one layer of fabric and repleat it all again. And you can imagine my surprise and joy. So I did just that and pleated the 2-layered skirt and sewed it together with the bodice and tried the whole thing on. And you can see that in the meantime I added the metal hoops to the sides of the bodice, and I finished the decorated Brustfleck. By the way, it is, I think, the most sloppily done piece of the whole costume. Like, the heavy pearls just ain't it. It's really difficult to make them stay, like, lay nicely, so I should probably just redo it using a different technique, but never mind. And one of the most important things left to do was finding a way to stiffen the collar. So I asked my dad to buy me a nice and bendy wire, and he delivered. And then I turned the wire into sort of a bow shape, and that could be inserted into the collar between the outer fabric and the lining. And then I just stitched that in place, and it kind of worked. I don't think it's super nice because it didn't like completely smooth out the collar, which I only noticed after recording the dress, and that starts bothering me a bit. But also at the same time, the whole shape and the angle is pretty similar to what I see in the portrait, so I'm okay with that. And then unfortunately I didn't have any more excuses not to work on the other sleeve. I was running out of excuses, and I had to get back to the gazillionth wool bound strip. And honestly, at this point, anything in the world sounded better than the sleeves. Hi and welcome to I am so done with the sleeves, so let me move on to a wire instead. Come on, no, that's just nasty. And then I tried everything on, and not gonna lie, it looked quite dope. And apart from some minor fixes I needed to do, the only major thing left to do was shorten the chains that I got on Etsy. Generally speaking, sourcing the right jewelry was a pain in the ass, because I didn't really feel like spending thousands of dollars on, you know, meticulously made replicas of Renaissance jewelry for a Snow White outfit. So I tried to go around it, and I ordered some, like, I don't even think they're like decorative chains. They look pretty hardware to me. I bought some cheap replicas of Renaissance rings that you can buy in like UK museum shops, and then I bought two beautiful Tudor inspired jewelry pieces from Etsy that I just ripped apart to salvage useful parts. Then I also had a gold covered medallion that my dad 3D printed for me and then covered it in gold because he was bored. And then I also bought a 1980s brooch that I again found on Etsy, and at this point I legit know every single brooch and pendant on Etsy that is posted under the name of Renaissance, Tudor, Antique, Gold, Black and White. I know it all. So I glued pearls to the salvaged pieces, and then I sewed the pieces onto the decorative collar, because if you look at the portrait, there is a lot more going on at the collar than just the pearls. So I pinned the 1980s brooch on as well, and I stitched some real pearls in the corners, and it was pretty much done. And one last element of this outfit, which was pretty spontaneous, and it was sort of a last minute addition when I realized I have more time than I did think I have, was this pair of the world's ugliest shoes. Unfortunately, Renaissance shoes were ugly AF, and those worn under chronic dresses seem to be no exception. So I splurged on a pair of these bad boys, and though now that I'm thinking about it, they're still looking better than most Balenciaga shoes these days. What is interesting is because different shoes for your left and right feet were not invented yet, and these are apparently quite historically accurate. These two are literally the same shape, and I actually wore them on wrong feet first when I first tried them on.
Shake the room, now they delirious. Next one's up is us, that's the answer if you curious. Show them what they never saw. Time to show them who you are. Final chance to...
Anyway, summing up, I am pretty okay with this outfit. There's obviously like 1,000 things I already see that I hate, but overall it was a fun project to work on. It was definitely one of the most complicated projects I've ever attempted because of the amount of elements and then because of the amount of jewelry and decoration. It was just very rich, if I could say that. Also, we were trying to film it at a castle twice, actually at 2 different castles, and one of the castles we had to cancel because we went into lockdown, and then the other castle didn't let me in. So luckily enough, I live in an old-ass city that has a lot of 16th century buildings, so hopefully that will be good enough. But oh, it was also raining, and let's just say I want to get this dress a proper photo shoot once with like flowers and apples and 16th century castles, but you know, I'm willing to wait until it's safe. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you ever did a Disney inspired Snow White costume, you can share it in the comments, and I'd love to have a look if there's a way to post a link to that actually, but there should be. So anyway, thanks for watching, and sorry for talking for such a long time. I'm actually a bit sore now. Bye!